Hello, my name is Dana Hilfinger. I'm an extension educator with Central State University, and today I'm going to be talking about installing an electric deer fence. So there's kind of 5 main components to an electric powered deer fence, and we're going to look at 2 of them down here today, and then go up into the field and look at 3 of the other ones. So the first component is going to be your energizer. So whatever is going to be powering your fence. There's kind of 2 different options. You can either choose a solar powered option if you don't have a power source around, or there's a plug-in option. The one I have is right in here. It's inside my high tunnel, and then it connects out to my fence through this rod here. A general rule of thumb for using any kind of energizer for your fence is that you're going to want one that, so for every 3 miles of fence line, you'll want 1 output joule. So these energizers come with different output joule ratings. They'll also usually come with different claims for how much fence line they'll power. But again, just a general good rule of thumb is that for every 1 output joule, it powers about 3 miles of fence line. One important thing to be aware of with that is that if you have kind of 3 layers of fence, so if you're running 3 wires of fence around your field, you have to kind of calculate that total distance there. So it's not just the 1 lap perimeter around your field, but for 3 lines, it would be 3 times that perimeter. In addition to the energizer, you also have the second component of the electric deer fence, which is your grounding rod. Our grounding rod is right here. You can see we have a wire that's running here that's coming from the energizer to the grounding rod, and then it clamps on using a grounding rod clamp. My fence is not on right now, so I can touch all of this. But the grounding rod is just a galvanized piece of steel that you pound into the ground, and it's what allows you to complete that circuit. So when any kind of wildlife comes in contact with your fence, by having the grounding rod, it's completing the circuit, and then thus the animal is charged. The grounding rod, a couple things to be aware of with that are that for every 1 mile of fence, you're going to want at least 3 feet of grounding rod. So you'll want a grounding rod that's at least 3 feet long for every 1 mile of fence that you're running. So in this case, I'm running about 3/4 of a mile of fence. And so I have a grounding rod that is about 3 feet that's pounded into the ground there. A couple other important things about the grounding rod. You want to put it in a portion of the field that's going to stay consistently wet. So the reason you do that is that drier soil doesn't conduct electricity as well. So in this case, I put my grounding rod in a section of the field that often gets a little bit wet. It's off on the side of the high tunnel by where my irrigation is. So any kind of leakages I have from the irrigation help to keep the soil pretty wet here. And then any runoff from the high tunnel as well also keeps it pretty wet. So one other thing especially regarding the energizer, is that for the purposes of this fence, because we're using it really to exclude wildlife from a vegetable or a fruit plot, the wildlife that we're trying to exclude is generally most active at night. So it's good to get an energizer that has either some kind of wildlife setting where it's more active or higher voltage at night, or if you are installing your energizer and you have one that hooks up directly into your outlet, you can just get a timer for it so that it's just running from dusk until dawn, when you're most likely to get wildlife in your plot. It helps kind of conserve energy, and then also to not have your fence on potentially when there's not really any threat of deer in particular being in your fields. So those are kind of the 2 components down here, the energizer and the grounding rod. Again, the energizer connects both to the grounding rod here through a grounding clamp, and then also here to our fence. This is a handle here for the gate, but the energizer connects to the fence here to this wire here, which is the next component of the fence that we're going to talk about. Here we have a couple different components of the fence. So remember, there's 5 different components of your deer fence, electric deer fence system. We talked about the energizer and also the grounding rod. Up here, we're going to show a couple different components. So we have the posts. So we have 2 different posts that we're going to be showing. This one here is a self-insulating post, and they're used within kind of a line of the fence to be able to support your wire here. The post that we chose here, as I mentioned, is a self-insulating post. It's also this one in particular is made out of fiberglass, and it's pretty flexible, so it'll kind of bend in the wind. These are called Stepin Posts, so it's pretty easy. You just step them in just like that, and then they have these clips all along the side where the wire can fit into. So you can kind of choose any different kind of height here along your post. And this outer wire, we have here a range of heights from about 12 inches up to 24 inches, but these go up to 36 inches. These are really kind of your best bet as opposed to lining this whole field with something like a metal T-post, for example, or a wooden post, for a couple reasons. One, they're really durable. So as I mentioned, they flex, they don't break super easily, so they can kind of bend in the wind a little bit better compared to like a wooden post or something like that, which generally has a little bit more rigidity. They also, as I mentioned, are self-insulating. So that means that you don't have as much of a likelihood of having a short in your fence if the wire comes into contact with a metal, like you would if these were all T-posts along the side. The other great feature of these is that they're relatively inexpensive. So compared to lining this whole field with T-posts, these here are about $1.50 to $2 a piece, compared to a T-post, which would be, between like $4 to $8 depending on the size. So they're a fraction of the price of your T-post, which makes them the more economical choice as well. So this is the post that we use in between the corners of the field. On the corners then, I do use a T-post. And that's because the T-post provides a bit more bracing. So as I mentioned, with these, they flex back and forth. So if you try to exert any pressure on them, they'll bend backwards. So the T-post offers a little bit more stability at the corners to keep this wire tight so that it's not quite as loose and so that this isn't flexing as much. So we'll go take a look at the corner post and how to use the corner post here in a moment. The important component when you're using any kind of metal post is that you have a good insulator. In this case, we have just a kind of pretty simple yellow insulator here that will go on the T-post, and then the wire goes right in here. So it goes kind of in between these threads here. So this is, just again something that's going to keep that wire from touching the metal T-post, which could cause a short in your fence. So now talking about the wire that we use. So in a more permanent fencing situation, you might do something like put in wood posts and then use a high tensile aluminum or steel wire or something. But in this case, because this is something that is temporary, I use it during the season and then I take it down during the winter. I want to use something that is going to be able to be reused year after year. And so we have what's called a turbo wire. This has 9 strands of metal in it, which is generally kind of what turbo means. There's other types of wire, but one of the reasons that I like this in particular is that it offers both high visibility, so it's white as opposed to a metal wire, which means that an animal is more likely to see it and kind of stop and be deterred just by sight initially. And then it also is more durable than like an alternative like a tape. So they make thicker wires as well that are almost like a 1-inch wide tape that you could put around the field. But especially like given even a day like today where we have a bit of a breeze, the tape would be flapping around a lot and can break and again lead to problems with keeping your fence charged. So this is really a nice kind of durable option, this turbo braid here. This is the wire that we use all around the outside, both layers of the fence, and we're going to talk about those two different layers here in a moment. But it's really, it's pretty easy to work with too. It's something that, you know, you can bend pretty easily and it will keep its shape. So it's pretty easy to be able to wrap it around itself and tie it up in order to attach it to your posts. The last kind of component of the fence that I wanted to talk about that you would want to get if you're looking to install an electric deer fence is a voltage meter. So I don't recommend testing the voltage of your fence by touching it. We have these voltage meters here which can tell you if your fence is reading the voltage, has the voltage that you want it to have. So this one, for example, is pretty simple. It has a hook here that will hook onto your fence like this. And then it has this here, which is like your little mini grounding rod, which you stick into the ground. And then it will tell you if there's a voltage to the fence. This fence currently is off, but ideally, if this was powered on right now, we would want it to be reading between 4,000 and 5,000 volts for excluding deer from a vegetable or fruit plot. 4,000 to 5,000 volts is about what you want your fence to be reading at. So these things are really handy here. One important note, just because there can be some differences between voltage meters and different brands, is that you want to get the same brand voltage meter that you have Energizer. So make sure that your brands are compatible, at least for the Energizer and the voltage meter. They don't need to be compatible, or they don't need to be the same brand for the other components of your fence, but for these two it is important for getting an accurate reading. In terms of the installation of the fence, the process is pretty simple. To start out with, we installed all of the posts. So we installed the T-post on the corners and the ends, and then these flexible posts about every 40 feet along the outside of your fence. So you want these little flexible self-insulating posts about every feet in order to support your fence. Then after we installed the post, we then installed the wire. So we just started at one end, and these rolls of wire roll out pretty easily. You can just have one person pretty much doing it. So it's a pretty simple process. So when we installed the wire, as you'll probably notice, we have 2 layers of fence here. And this is really important for deer exclusion in particular, because the 2 layers are really key to kind of tricking the deer into thinking that this isn't an area that they want to go into. The first layer we put at about 24 inches, or sorry, at about 20 inches. And then the back layer, the bottom one, is at about 12 inches, and the top one is about 24, 28 inches or so. So what happens is the deer approaches this fence, it maybe runs into it initially, or it sees it out here, and then it stops And we'll think that this is both kind of a tall barrier as well as a long barrier. So deer are very good at jumping really high. They can also jump really far, but they can't jump both high and far. And so by having this like 2-layered fence here, what we're doing is we're tricking it into thinking that it's both a really tall and a really wide gulf for them to jump over. So that's one of the reasons why the visibility of the fence is really important. So having a wire that's very visible, and even in addition to that, also installing potentially some of the little like orange streamers or something like that along the fence are some of the examples of ways that you can make the fence more visible for the deer, so that when they come across it, they stop and they are kind of initially deterred even without getting shocked just by the fact that it looks like a really big, really tall and really wide barrier. These posts here are spaced out at roughly 3 to 4 feet apart. So you want your outer layer and your inner layer to be about, again, 3 to 4 feet apart. And then again, that outer layer is going to have just the one line here that'll be at about 20 inches. And then the inside layer is what has the 2 lines, one that's lower at about 12 inches and the other one that's up a little bit higher. We, again, first installed the posts, then we installed the wires. We added gates to the fence as well. So in this field I have 3 gates where I can get in at different points of the field that just have simple plastic handles that allow us to enter and exit the field at different points and not have to hop over the fence. So that's also important. And then we went down and installed the grounding rod and the energizer. We got those hooked up and then tested out the fence, and simple as that. It's ready to go. Here we have the corner post, which I mentioned are made of T-post here. So these are 6-foot T-posts that were pounded in on the corners. Again, each of the layers of fence has a T-post. And then attached to the T-post are these yellow insulators here. These are what I showed before, are just a pretty quick and easy way to make sure that the wire is not touching your metal post. If the wire is touching your metal post, you're pretty likely to get some kind of short in your fence, which will prevent the fence from actually being charged and doing what it's supposed to do and deterring the animals. The yellow insulator is really important. They make many different kinds of insulators. These are relatively inexpensive and easy to come by, so you can get them pretty much at any farm supply store. In fact, all of these materials here that I've shown today you can get at pretty much any farm supply store, someplace like Tractor Supply or Rural King or anything like that would carry most of these products here. So the insulator is what is holding on this turbo wire here. It's just has this kind of connector piece here that we wrap the wire around on each side to make sure that it kind of stays taut, and then it just goes along the other direction. You'll see that with the posts, the T-post here on the corners, they don't flex like the other posts that we were using, so they hold steady, which keeps this wire nice and tight. If you were using one of the self-insulating posts on the corner, then it would be much more likely to bow inward, and then this wire wouldn't stay as tight as it is right now. One of the other reasons that is important is that if the wire is loose or it's sagging and on the ground at all, or it comes into contact with grasses or other vegetation around your fence, that can also cause a short. So grasses and other plant material aren't great conductors of electricity, but they can become a problem. So if that did happen, then again, your fence wouldn't function as it's supposed to. It wouldn't be charged and you would have that short. So having having your fence, your wire stay off the ground and not come into contact with that vegetation is really important, which is why keeping that tension is something that we want. Another way to do that is by installing a fence tensioner as well along the line. So these are pretty inexpensive plastic tensioners. There's an example of one right down there, the white thing that's along the inner line of the fence. And you can just ratchet that and crank it up until your fence is as tight as you'd like it to be. So that's another way to get this tension in the fence wire that we're looking for. The total install time for the fence takes about 3 to 4 hours for 2 people. So it's a relatively quick thing to do. Those Stepin Posts are pretty easy to install, and then having a T-post pounder to install the T-post makes this go pretty quickly, and running the wire is again not too bad. So 2 people, about 3 to 4 hours.